speaker. Weiss. I'd like to introduce him. He's spoken at many of our events, and he is very informative also.
Everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I think we owe Wilhelmina Kelly a vote of thanks for filling us in. We keep talking about the Battle of Brooklyn, and then it went on to the Battle of Manhattan. But she filled us in with details, many of which I'd never known before. And it's people like her that keep the movement going, that maybe the world will eventually know that the first battle of the American Revolution, when we were a nation, was right here, and it was also the biggest battle of the war, even though the war went on 7 more years. So, Wilhelmina, thank you. And as I stand here, I also want to remind you that the monument that we rededicate every year is not the only landmark here. The park itself is a landmark because in many ways its history paralleled that of the Revolution and also went on, as did the memory of these prisoners. Just before the war started, General Nathaniel Greene, who ended up really the #2 man to George Washington, but he had risen from private in the Rhode Island militia. He became the engineer who fortified most of the forts in Brooklyn and in New York in the face of the advancing British army they knew was to come. And it was right in this spot. I'm trying to visualize exactly where it is, and frankly I can't do it, but the fort was in the shape of a crescent, and it was at the top of the hill, just where we are now. And in front of the fort, they had trenches. They were going to put soldiers with guns in the trenches to ward off the British who were presumably going to come through the fort, go through here, go to Brooklyn Heights, go to Brooklyn, and go into the East River and maybe into Manhattan. And it was the most fortified of all the forts. There are at least 6 forts in Brooklyn, and it was the most fortified one. They said 6 8-pounders. I don't know really what that is. I asked the lady in the museum to my left. She said, well, those guns were Civil War drums. So I don't know what 8-pounders were, but there was no fort on Long Island that had the equivalent armament. So when the battle started and the British got closer, their strategy, when they knew about the trenches in front, they started building trenches and putting their soldiers in the trenches, and they got within very close to Fort Putnam, which had been built here, an earthen fort, and named incidentally for General Israel Putnam, who made himself known during the Battle of Concord in New England, when he said, don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. So as the British trenches got closer, Washington sent 2 officers here. Nathaniel Greene, by the way, got sick and did not participate in the battle. But there were 2 other generals who came. They told Washington that to hold the fort was untenable and they better retreat. And this was one of the reasons they did retreat, as Kelly, as we all know, they retreated across the river. The retreat successful because the night was cloudy. Nobody could see. Boats came down from New England, helped take some of the men off, and Washington got to Manhattan without a loss of a single person that was left of his army. So after the Revolution, this site, in a sense, became abandoned. But then it would revive in the War of 1812. Not many people know it was the United States that declared war on England in that war. England, fresh from having defeated Napoleon, was looking to solidify and gain more ground in America, which had lost so many decades before. As you know, they fought in Washington. They almost burned down the White House. They fought in Louisiana, the Battle of Louisiana. They encouraged the Indian tribes hostile to America to fight against the United States. And the worst thing they did was impress seamen, taking seamen from ships, American, even Navy ships, and impressing them into the British Navy. In other words, the United States was humiliated, and they decided the only way to stop it was to declare war. Well, the war went on 2 years, and I don't know how the rumor or the fear started, but they somehow in Brooklyn got the idea that maybe the British would come again with 20,000, 30,000 troops and repeat what they'd done in the Revolution. So they frantically start digging another fort here, which they eventually called the fort that has the name today. And everybody pitched in. Grandmothers, pregnant women, teenage boys, and they came from all over. A school in New Jersey, the head of the school would come with the students. The Tammany Society came. The Masons of New York came, and the Masons said, do your job as a Mason. They were led here by DeWitt Clinton, one-time senator, one-time presidential candidate, and later governor of New York. He was mayor of New York at this point. And everybody pitched in. 200 women came singing songs, and they worked feverishly, and they built another fort, Fort Greene. And then they appointed General Jeremiah Johnson, who was a local hero. He was in charge of the fort. The militia units moved in, and they waited and waited, and of course, as we know, the British didn't come. And then, meanwhile, the area around here changed considerably. A very small population at first, but the ferry that started in the early 19th century that ran between Brooklyn and New York brought thousands and thousands of people to this area. And so they began to think of it as a meeting place, as a park. And meetings were held in 1940, for example. They had a ceremony right here on this spot to commemorate, on July 4th, to commemorate the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And in the write-up in the Brooklyn Eagle, it said that there was an ode contributed by Walter Whitman, as he was known, and it was sung at this ceremony. In 1847, the city of Brooklyn, which it was, authorized this as a park, and it was used for meetings of different sorts. At the start of the Civil War, for example, they had a rally in support of the Union forces. It had a double meaning, really. There was not only to give support to the Union, but there were an awful lot of people in Brooklyn who, believe it or not, were in favor of the Confederacy. They wanted a show of force to show those people that they better not start anything because Brooklyn was 100% behind the Union. And then in 1867, I think I have the date right, I hope, they hired Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted to design the park, which is essentially what it is today, although it has gone through many, many changes, improvements, particularly in the last years. You could thank your local conservancy and local supporters for keeping this park up the way it was designed. Then in 1897, a year before the consolidation with New York, it was officially named Fort Greene. Thank you.